Gaza becomes the deadliest conflict zone for journalists. Full investigative report. Tonight, we turn our attention to a deeply alarming and globally significant development. Gaza has become the most dangerous place in the world for journalists. Since the start of the conflict in late 2023, more than 170 journalists have been killed, most of them Palestinian. This death toll surpasses any recent war zone, and the toll on press freedom, transparency, and human rights is staggering. Journalists in Gaza are being systematically targeted, silenced, and killed, often while performing their duties in full press gear. Their deaths have drawn sharp criticism from human rights organizations, press freedom advocates, and foreign governments. This report will investigate the scale of the killings, who is responsible, why Gaza's journalists are uniquely vulnerable, and what this means for freedom of the press in conflict zones. A death toll without precedent. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, more than 170 media workers have lost their lives in Gaza since the conflict escalated in 2023. By comparison, only 15 journalists were killed during the entirety of the US-led Iraq War in its first 2 years. In Ukraine, roughly 20 media workers were killed over the course of the first 18 months of war. In Gaza, the death toll has risen at a pace and scale previously unseen. Most of the victims are local journalists, many of whom were freelancers with no international protections or institutional support. Some died in airstrikes on civilian neighborhoods. Others were killed while live streaming or reporting from the field. Several were reportedly targeted in strikes on their residences, raising questions about deliberate identification, deliberate targeting, or collateral casualty. The Israeli military has repeatedly stated that it does not target journalists and that all airstrikes are directed at Hamas-affiliated infrastructure or operatives. However, numerous cases suggest a pattern of journalists being killed despite clearly identifying themselves as press. Eyewitnesses and video footage have shown journalists wearing vests marked press when they were struck. In some cases, entire families of reporters have been killed in what rights groups are calling punitive or retaliatory strikes. Human Rights Watch and Reporters Without Borders have demanded independent investigations into whether Israel is intentionally targeting media workers. Further complicating matters, Israeli authorities have increasingly framed some Palestinian journalists as terrorist affiliates. In one statement, a government spokesperson said, "There are no journalists in Gaza, only Hamas propagandists," drawing fierce backlash from international media outlets. Critics say this rhetoric dehumanizes media workers and lays the groundwork for unlawful killings under the guise of war. No international access, no witnesses. One of the reasons these killings have drawn such alarm is the lack of independent verification or protection. The Israeli government has barred all foreign journalists from entering Gaza since October 2023. This ban means that the only voices documenting the war from inside Gaza are Palestinians themselves. With no international press presence, no third-party observers, and an overloaded humanitarian system, the deaths of these journalists often go unreported or underinvestigated. Their loss also results in fewer reports, fewer images, and fewer witnesses to the devastation taking place. "We're being wiped out," said one surviving Palestinian reporter in a remote interview. "We are the eyes of the world, and those eyes are being closed one by one." International outcry and legal implications. The United Nations, the International Federation of Journalists, and Amnesty International have all issued statements condemning the deaths and calling for accountability. The International Criminal Court has received formal submissions asking it to investigate the killings of journalists as potential war crimes. Under international humanitarian law, journalists are civilians and are granted special protection during armed conflict. Deliberate attacks on them can constitute violations of the Geneva Conventions. In December 2023, the United Nations passed a resolution urging all parties to the conflict to respect the rights of journalists and ensure their safety. However, enforcement mechanisms remain weak, and the deaths continue. The human cost and the silencing of truth behind every name is a story. Among the dead are photographers, videographers, mothers, fathers, and students who took up journalism to tell the stories of their people. They worked under impossible conditions: no electricity, limited food, under fire, and yet continued reporting until their final moments. Their deaths represent more than the loss of life. They symbolize the death of first-hand truth, the disappearance of independent documentation, and a chilling message to those who seek to hold power to account. Conclusion: journalism as a battlefield. Gaza has become not just a conflict zone, but a battlefield for truth. The unprecedented death toll of journalists there is not simply a tragedy. It is a global crisis for press freedom and accountability. As the conflict rages on and the silence grows deeper, the question must be asked: who benefits when the truth dies with the messenger? Follow Rethink report for continued investigations.